For a long time, Morgoth, also known as Melkor, was the most powerful being on Arda. At one point, he was so powerful that he could take on the rest of the Valar combined. But at the end of the First Age, Morgoth was a mere shadow of his former self. In this video, we're going to take a look at Morgoth's vast powers, and discuss how they changed as he weakened throughout the ages. I have perhaps made the mistake in previous videos of underselling Morgoth and his capabilities, I believe by not talking about him more when he was at an earlier phase, and I want to use this video to remedy that, and help people understand just how powerful he was, at least for a time. As one of the preeminent Ainur to enter Ea, that is, the universe, it was Morgoth's role to help shape the universe as well as Arda. Morgoth was mightier than all his brethren. Although his main affinity was with heat and cold, he did have a share in all other powers. However, Morgoth wanted to shape Arda completely to his own liking, and when Manwë and the other Valar rejected that, Morgoth left for a while. He soon returned to Arda and disrupted the works of the Valar wherever he could, and he took a terrifying form in doing so. And he descended upon Arda in power and majesty greater than any other of the Valar, as a mountain that wades in the sea and has its head above the clouds and is clad in ice and crowned with smoke and fire. And the light of the eyes of Melkor was like a flame that withers with heat and pierces with a deadly cold. During his early conflicts with the Valar, Morgoth would go around Arda simply undoing all of their works on a massive geological scale, showing off power that he wielded in those early days. The Valar would raise mountains, Morgoth would trample them. The Valar would create valleys, Morgoth would raise them up. The Valar would create seas, Morgoth would spill them. Morgoth would only concede defeat when Tulkas the Strong arrived, a Valar that Morgoth could not physically contend with. This concession was merely temporary though. Morgoth soon returned and delved his underground fortress of Autumno. This would be a font of corruption that would mar the spring of Arda. And though the Valar knew naught of it yet, nonetheless, the evil of Melkor and the blight of his hatred flowed out thence, and the spring of Arda was marred. Green things fell sick and rotted, and rivers were choked with weeds and slime, and fens were made, rank and poisonous, the breeding place of flies, and forests grew dark and perilous, the haunts of fear, and beasts became monsters of horn and ivory, and dyed the earth with blood. Morgoth would also launch the first attack, surprising the Valar by destroying the two lamps, Iluin and Ormal. This would be a catastrophe of unmatched scale, and it took the strength of the Valar to stop all of their work from being undone. They would abandon their island of Almoren, and instead fortify and beautify the western land of Aman, now known as Valinor. In doing so, they would give Morgoth dominion of Middle-earth, and he would do with it as he pleased. Even in the Third Age, things like the Misty Mountains and Mount Doom are the legacy of some of Morgoth's creations. So as you can see, Morgoth was supremely powerful at this point, capable of altering the universe and the world as one might step on a sandcastle. In fact, it would be easier to list the things Morgoth could not do during this time, as he was still constrained by some of the laws and limits that the Iluvatar had set upon the universe, and I'll list them here. Despite his vast, seemingly boundless powers, Morgoth could not utterly destroy creation, or matter, or spirits, as in, he could not erase them from existence. Another very important limit was that Morgoth could not create true independent life, and any life he created would either be puppets or automatons, imbued with his malice, and this was one of the major reasons for his original downfall into evil. One must also understand the depth of Morgoth's power and the Ainur in general. Their power is not infinite, and they expended vast amounts of it on their creations. One good example is Yavanna, with the help of Nienna, created the two trees of Valinor. When the trees were destroyed, she lacked the power to replicate them. Morgoth suffered from the same problems. Although his native strength was much greater than the other Valar, he also expended much more of it into his own creations, as well as into the very fabric of the world itself. This is the concept of Arda Mard, which Morgoth was responsible for. Although it was partially due to Morgoth weaving discord into the music of the Ainur, a lot of it came from when Morgoth physically walked Arda, and the damages he caused during that time. Arda Mard was a taint upon the world, in which the shadow of evil could never truly be erased or suppressed, not even in Valinor. Certain places were more affected than others. One place that bore damage for thousands of years was the north of Middle-earth, and it would experience bouts of unnatural cold even into the 4th Age. Certain elements could also be affected. While bodies of water were generally kept free of corruption on account of them being Ulmo's domain, it's said that gold carried a decent level of corruption. It had association with evil such as the One Ring and the affliction known as Dragon Sickness. You might notice that elves, and at least the Númenóreans, actually used silver a lot more than gold. This corruption was also capable of manifesting itself in both flora and fauna. Arda Mard also had major effects on both elves and men. Elves were more resistant to it, but the taint gradually wore down their physical bodies, meaning their spirits would eventually overpower them, rendering them as wraiths. This is why elves had to leave for Valinor, a place where Arda Mard was kept in check by the power of the Valar. As for men, evil more easily entered their hearts and minds, rendering them far more easy to corrupt. Even without the presence of a Dark Lord, men could still easily relapse into evil, as Tolkien briefly explored in his 4th Age story The New Shadow. Through his creation and reinforcement of Arda Mard, Morgoth gradually depleted his own power. Although his overall power became more widespread thanks to his vast hordes of servants, corrupted Maiar such as Sauron and the Balrogs, orcs, trolls, and eventually dragons, on a physical level he became far weaker. When the Valar attacked Morgoth during the Battle of Powers, Morgoth was physically defeated by Tulkas and taken back to Valinor in chains. In essence, the Morgoth who stood as the main foe of the Elves and the Edain during the First Age was a mere shadow of his former self, and most of his power had been dispensed into his servants or into the world itself. That's not to say he was weak, but his powers were severely limited compared to what they were in previous ages. For example, he raised the 3 volcanic peaks of Fangorodrim, he could cause them to erupt, but he could not simply trample entire mountain ranges like he used to, or make massive geological changes at a whim. Early in the First Age, he takes a fair form, goes east, and corrupts men shortly after they have awoken, a huge victory, but he soon loses the ability to take a fair form shortly afterwards and gets stuck in the form of a Dark Lord. During his duel with Fingolfin, he is wounded several times. One of those wounds, a stab to his foot, causes him to walk with a limp forever after, meaning he no longer even had the ability to fully regenerate. Perhaps the most terrifying display of his power during the First Age was the curse he placed upon Hurin and his family. Now, there has been some debate on how much of this was Morgoth's curse, and how much of the curse was from bad decision making, but I think Hurin's family had a great degree of bad luck that proves that something bigger was at play. So even in a much weakened state, Morgoth could seemingly place ill omens on people that would either affect the matter around them, or even affect their decision making, depending on what your stance is. In the end, Morgoth falls so far at a physical level that he is unable to resist during the War of Wrath. He flees and is basically manhandled by Eonwe, the Herald of Manwë. Eonwe is powerful, if not the most powerful of the Maiar, but Morgoth was once able to resist all of the Valar minus Tulkas at the same time, so you can now see how far a fall this truly is. Tolkien even states in Morgoth's Ring that Sauron was greater in the Second Age than Morgoth was at the end of the First Age. In saying all this, it's important to remember that Morgoth created the vast foundation of evil that Sauron ended up building upon. Although Sauron expended some of his own power into his creations, such as the One Ring, it didn't come close to the amount that Morgoth expended, and he would not have had the longevity or the success without his master's efforts. In fact, Morgoth expended so much of his power into Arda that even long after he was gone, the world still bore the scars that he inflicted upon it, and it would bear those scars until the world was remade. Thank you for watching, I hope you enjoyed it, or at least found it interesting. I think some of us, including myself, forget about just how powerful Morgoth was at one point, and that the version we meet in many of Tolkien's stories was not representative of the power he once wielded. One thing I really love about the Ainur in general is that their power is limited, and by expending it, they can gradually weaken over time. It makes them far more interesting than just standard godlike beings. Thanks, farewell, and remember, I, like Morgoth, expend my power into this channel and become weaker over time because of it.